Good evening, folks, and welcome back to Rhetoric 306 at the University of Texas. It is still me, Dr. Jennifer Sapio. I am thrilled to be with you for week 7 of our asynchronous course. We are well on our way into researching our Project 2 topics. So let's review where we are. So far, you have completed discussions 2, 3, and 4 in this unit, in which you have described one text and then another, as well as its purpose. And this week, we're moving on to discussions 5 and 6, which is going to have you get yet another text in your document set. So ultimately, you are headed toward collecting 8 sources to rhetorically analyze a local argument. And I'm so interested in all of these topics that you all have selected that have great impact on UT students and on the UT campus. So you're locating 4 viewpoint articles, 2 information, and 2 scholarly or peer-reviewed sources. This week, we're going to talk more about part of the evaluation process when we're evaluating our sources. Last week, of course, we talked about evaluating the venue and the ethos of the author, their credibility, their authority, etc. And this week, we're going to add to that a discussion of partisanship and bias as well. And you'll be analyzing which of your texts is more partisan and which is more authoritative. And lastly, I will guide you all through a great activity I hope will be really helpful in your writing process, really productive in getting you to brainstorm. We are going to walk through a Google form with questions to ask when you are analyzing written rhetoric. So that's our plan for today. Let's go ahead and jump right in with a couple of examples. So I'm going to show you all 2 articles in just a moment from 2 very different venues. And I would like, it's going to really illustrate, because of their differences, the significance of researching the rhetorical situation. And so that is what big picture you all are doing, as you did for the water quality question for Project 1, right? We used that geographic or cartographic metaphor to talk about the landscape, the lay of the land, and describing the stakeholders and important events, thinking about, history as a timeline perhaps, and giving important background for your readers as well. So you're going to do that with Project 2 as well, and think of who the stakeholders are, what their interests are, what qualifications they have to be speaking for each of your texts, and for all of them holistically. You're thinking through these elements of the expanded rhetorical situation, not just the audience and the message, the content of what is explicitly being stated by the communicator, but also all of these other factors, especially exigence. So remember, exigence is the urgency, the timeliness, the significance of publishing right then in that moment in the controversy. So again, really specific dates are important here. Are we talking about an article published right after a Supreme Court case, or an article published right after a police shooting, or an article published right before an important vote is about to happen on voting rights, for example? So all of those contextual elements would be really important to understand for each of your articles in your Project 2 document set. So keep this kind of visual in mind as you're analyzing all of the facets of your published pieces. And on the bottom right hand side of the slide there, you can see just some simple template language from your textbook about thinking about the purpose, which thank you all, you did a great job on discussion 4, thinking about the purpose of your text. And here's yet another additional way to summarize how to think about the aims or the motivations of your communicator in their speech. What do they want to persuade the audience of? What's the major point? Or I really like the very simple one at the bottom right-hand side of the slide. X wants Y to do or believe Z. Your author wants whom, which part of the audience, what demographic to do or believe what idea, what action item, what policy change are we talking about? So let's get really specific in just one moment with these 2 news examples, but I just want to have these in mind as elements that we're going to be rhetorically reading and thinking about, and I'll model discussing for you before you move into applying these categories and documents for project 2. So one other thing I wanted to show you before moving into these specific examples, actually let me move this over so I can be on screen as well. Okay, so perhaps some of you have seen before this type of imagery on the left, this media bias chart. This is from an organization called All Sides. There are others available online. If you quickly Google media bias chart, you can see a range of different visualizations, and I'm not committed to any particular one of them. In fact, we can have a conversation about if you agree or disagree with the categories here. We can also analyze this media bias chart as its own communication event. And if we were doing, if we had World Enough in Time, we could use this as an example today in class and go into thinking about who the communicator is, Googling this organization, noticing where their financial motivations are, what interests, what other positions do they take in public conversations, who specifically are the humans involved in the organization, what is their background, political, educational, otherwise, right? So all of the questions are still alive for this text as well. But for the moment, looking at just the content, the message of this piece, you can see from left to right and in the blue tones and the red tones, a categorization of news outlets based on their kind of political partisan leaning. And so you can see in the center under that C column, the Associated Press, BBC, NPR, Reuters, etc. And some of the left-leaning venues, you can see The Atlantic, The Economist, further left, MSNBC, and The New Yorker, Vox. And then on the right, you can see Wall Street Journal, New York Post, and further on the spectrum, you can see the Daily Mail and Fox News, for example. So agree or disagree. We can have a conversation if you want to send me an email and say, oh, I thought, one or the other was misidentified. That's in all fairness. The point is not that either of these is more authoritative than the other, actually. Partisanship and authority are 2 different questions, actually. And so I want you to consider both, and you're going to be asked to consider both in your discussion post 6 for this week when you're comparing your documents and noticing, okay, let me analyze. Perhaps you never have before considered the venue where you are getting your news from. What ideological perspective are they leaning toward? And then, so that gives you a partisanship, an idea about partisanship. And then you go ahead and start to think about the authority, start analyzing the ethical claims of experience, expertise, professional history, education, get into the logical arguments of claims, how the evidence is used to back these up, follow logical claims to actually fact check, see what sources are cited, and determine for yourself if you agree or disagree with the conclusions. So that's really where we're headed ultimately. Let's take, for example, as I've been promising for the past few minutes, let's take, for example, a couple of articles on a recent news topic, namely the California governor's decision to require the COVID-19 vaccine among the list of other required vaccines for children in public schools. So we're going to take a look at one article from NBC and one article from Fox News on the same topic. And we're obviously going to see the partisanship illustrated quite clearly. But then our next question is going to be thinking through the rhetorical situation, if I may return to this past slide, and analyzing the authority of the claims based on the communicator's ethos, the logic of the message, etc. And perhaps while we're at it, we can practice just really succinctly summarizing the purposes of these pieces. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. Follow me over to MSNBC to start.
California is now the first state to mandate COVID vaccinations for public and private school students. Governor Gavin Newsom says it will not take effect for all kids until the U.S. government has finished fully vetting the vaccine for two age groups, 12 to 15 and 5 to 11. The mandate is going to likely face pushback, of course, from parents following a recent string of anti-vaccination protests at school board meetings. Joining us now to talk more about this in San Jose, NBC's Scott Cohn. Scott, good to see you this afternoon. This is astounding, this development in the state of California, and I imagine quite controversial. Talk to me about what you're hearing there so far.
Yeah, it is generating some controversy, particularly in the sizable conservative pockets of this state. But Governor Newsom is pushing ahead with this. Remember, he beat back pretty handily a recall attempt just last month, based on, in large part, the closing argument, his response to COVID-19, and so he is running with that. So here is how this is going to work. The COVID-19 vaccine will be added to the list of 10 vaccinations that are currently already required for school kids, like polio, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, and the like. This effective following full FDA approval of the vaccines. We only have emergency use authorizations for the Pfizer vaccine for 12 and over. But we could see this taking effect as soon as this fall. It does apply to public and private schools. Because it's a regulation and not legislation, state law requires that there be medical and religious exemptions from this. Many experts are saying that beyond the schools, this could make a world of difference.
Schools are places where children are getting infected, and fortunately, they have a much lower morbidity and mortality rate than the general population, but they're going to bring it over to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. So it's really critical that we get school-aged children vaccinated for their own good in terms of safety, for their own good in terms of education, and for society's good.
Another potentially controversial aspect of this is that when the vaccination requirement goes into effect for school kids, it also goes into effect for teachers. Right now, there is an alternative, which is testing for COVID. That will go away under the governor's order, so we will see what the reaction is to that. The governor points out that California educates about 12% of the nation's school kids, but right now accounts for less than 1% of the school closures. The state also has the lowest COVID-19 case rate in the country. And the governor says he's running with that.
And across
Jasmine?
the country, that mandate for teachers across New York City area going into effect this past Friday. So seeing how that's going to play out when doors open on Monday morning. Scott Cohen, thanks for that. We appreciate it.
Okay, so as we think about that coverage of the news on MSNBC, let's think through some of these questions about the rhetorical situation. And again, this is just an example, right? You all are covering news a little closer to home, but this is an example of the process that you want to go through. So we think about the communicator, we think about their partisan bias. And again, I use that language not as a bad word, but as a fact that we all have our motivations and interests and positionality within controversies. So we have a left-leaning media publication venue. We have an audience, therefore, who would, let's think about the beliefs and interests and values of the audience, generally speaking, would be also perhaps left-leaning, perhaps democratic politics, perhaps in the context here, thinking about the rhetorical situation of the politicization of the vaccination efforts around COVID-19, you also could imagine that the audience has more favorable feelings about vaccination in general, about vaccination mandates perhaps as well. The exigence seems quite clear that there was an inciting moment for this news video to be published. There was this event that Governor Newsom declared, that school-age children and teachers would be required to be vaccinated. Now with 11 required vaccinations, the COVID-19 vaccination being number 11 after a list of 10. And so then when we start to look through the question above here, who are the stakeholders? What are their interests and their qualifications? We could, brainstorm and talk about this for 30 minutes, but just really quickly, the folks who are mentioned in the piece, we see a doctor from Cal Berkeley, Dr. Schwartzberg, who weighs in about the transmission from school-age children to larger populations. We have the quality of a few quotes and statistics, a bit of data mentioned at the end, perhaps as a logical appeal that California educates 12% of the nation's children and boasts 1% of school closures to date and the lowest COVID-19 case rate in the country. So we have some logical appeals. We have, some emotional appeals, I think, as the news anchors mentioned multiple times, the word controversy multiple times, that this is going to be controversial, that folks are going to be potentially upset, have strong feelings. And so I think there certainly are tensions running high around this question, not just in California, but elsewhere, that are acknowledged in this piece. And then lastly, just thinking about the purpose very quickly, if we could summarize in just a sentence or so, we could say that the producers of this piece want to persuade the viewers of this MSNBC report of what major point would we say? This isn't an op-ed. It's not a viewpoint piece, and so it's not going to have a necessarily as strong or as explicit an argument as you may see in other genres. But perhaps if we think and kind of add up in total, your textbook calls it the circle of analytic thinking, right? If we kind of add up all of this information about the rhetorical situation, about all of the pressures and appeals working together, it might be fair to say, considering the placement of these logical arguments, the usage of the expert witness bringing in the doctor from Cal Berkeley, it might be fair to say that the producers want the audience to believe that the vaccination mandate in California is reasonable, appropriate, and will be helpful to public health efforts, right? Is that fair to say perhaps about the purpose of this piece? Now let's go and take a look to see another example of the coverage of this story from another partisan perspective. Okay, so here is a story from Fox News on the same topic. We'll just skim it quickly. The title, as you can see, Jason Aldean slams Governor Gavin Newsom's vaccine mandate for kids to attend school. So we have the same exigence, the same context as far as the inciting event. We have a different news venue and therefore perhaps arguably a different audience with different beliefs, values, and ideas about the vaccine mandate. So let's keep reading and see what appeals are made and what moves we can see structurally in this article by Tyler McCarthy. Jason Aldean spoke out against California Governor Gavin Newsom's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, which requires students to get the jab in order to attend school in the state. On Sunday, the country singer, who has been in the spotlight lately for he and his wife's critical opinions of the Biden administration, shared an image of a headline highlighting the mandate in California and denounced it in a caption on Instagram. So let me get this straight. It is no longer our decisions as parents or free Americans to make decisions about our kids. Gavin Newsom makes those decisions for us now, Aldean wrote. You gotta be kidding me. People in California should be outraged, and people everywhere else better start standing up and speaking out now. This is not how America and being free works. Per Newsom's decision, California will now be the first state in the U.S. to require COVID-19 vaccination for students older than 12 if they want to attend class in person. Essentially, the move adds the COVID-19 vaccine to the list of required vaccinations that school children are already subject to. We have a similar factual detail there as we saw in the other piece as well. The vaccine requirement would be enforced after the Food and Drug Administration gives its approval for different age groups to receive the shot, while still allowing for religious and medical exemptions. We have that similar factual detail as well. So a consistency between these pieces. As far as accuracy, which adds to their authority, New York City also recently established a vaccine mandate for teachers in the Big Apple, prompting a group of teachers to petition the U.S. Supreme Court to block the city's mandate. Aldean's criticism of Newsom's order comes days after he said he will not apologize for his political beliefs after previously defending his wife for dressing their children in anti-Biden merchandise. I will never apologize for my beliefs or my love for my family and country, Aldean said in a recent post. This is the greatest country in the world, and I want to keep it that way, the crooner added with the hashtag unapologetic. So we won't have time to read the whole article from beginning to end right now, although you can certainly find it quite easily online. I can link it as well. But I wanted to pause here on this line about love for family and country, which I think is such a powerful emotional appeal, which you can often see across the political spectrum and in a variety of partisan pieces. So we could probably clearly articulate as far as a purpose for this article that the author is certainly trying to inform the audience or persuade them perhaps of Aldine's position, and we could analyze Aldine's kind of reputation, his following, the kind of demographic of folks who would find him to be a reliable communicator as well. That would be a really fascinating question to analyze too. So I hope this shows a kind of clear picture of at least two examples on the same topic of how issue can be represented along the political spectrum, along the bias spectrum within media. And it gave us some good practice thinking about the rhetorical situation, exigence of articles, communicators, how messages are relayed, and the emotional, logical, and ethical appeals therein. So let's go ahead and move now to an activity that I hope will help you, will help guide you through some of these questions now applied to your own work for Project 2. Okay, welcome back. We are over at our Canvas course. Oh my goodness, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Sneeze. We are on the Canvas course website at the home page. If you go over to modules, I'm going to show you where this activity is that I would like for you to complete, and you, in fact, I think will really be grateful to have completed as a way to brainstorm for your project too. So scrolling down through modules, here's where you found your week 7 lecture. That's not there yet because I'm recording it right now. Here's your ebook, all of our Unit 1 materials for Project 1, and now scrolling down to Unit 2 materials for Project 2. The last thing on the list is a Google form for brainstorming Project 2, analyzing written rhetoric. If you click there, you will be able to open the Google form in a new browser window. And here is what you will find. So as you go through completing the questions of this Google form for one of your Project 2 documents, you will essentially be generating content here for your Project 2 report. So please keep track and use your email account here on your Google form so that when you get the response emailed to you, you will be able to see this content. Because again, this will be really helpful information for you for your Project 2 report. So choose one of your Project 2 documents from your document set, one of those 4 viewpoint, 2 information, or 2 peer-reviewed or scholarly articles, and perhaps choose the most complicated, the most dense, the one that you kind of need the most guidance going through for this guided Google form. So you're going to go ahead and enter your name, and then you will answer the questions. What is the main point of your document for Project 2? How does the communicator support this point or make it convincing? So this is asking you to think about, in other words, the structural organization and the logic, the claims and the evidence used to make the points in your article. In other words, to think about what is being stated and how it is being stated. So these are all kind of synonymous ways as we've been trying to describe for the past week or two of essentially rhetorically reading, critically thinking, and analyzing what and how your authors are making their arguments. The next question asks you, what sort of character does the communicator create through the text? What is the author's role within the text itself? Or how are other communicators, i.e., in the case of the MSNBC video, other, people coming in as reliable witnesses to give their quotations and to share their positions, right? Is that the case in one of your articles as well? What are all the ways in which he or she builds credibility? Is there like an author bio section that helps to give the professional information? Is it referring to other authorities? Is it citing credible sources and studies and data? Go ahead and list the attempts that you notice where the author is building or establishing credibility. These quotations, direct quotations from your article, will be helpful in your report ultimately as well. An additional question to consider: how specifically does the communicator attempt to appeal to the audience's emotions? Like we were talking about with that Jason Aldean quotation from the Instagram post about love for family, love for country. How much is that emotional appeal involved in persuasion about public health, or whatever the case may be in your article for Project 2? What specific emotions are being appealed to? Again, is it love, patriotism? Is it fear? Is it worry? Be as specific and explicit as you can in identifying those beliefs and values that the communicator is appealing to as well. List those emotional appeals with quotations. And then just last two questions: what tone and style does the writer use? Is this a performance, at least, of objective fact-telling? Is it a more narrative story? Like some of this makes me think about one of our Project 1 texts about the children getting sick, right? That had a very narrative style to it as well. Is it kind of an aggressive, opinionated style? Being able to notice the difference between those helps you as well to analyze and think about the author's purpose, what they were trying to represent and perform as in the piece. Is the language informal or formal? That, of course, is a purposeful choice. What do you notice about the word choices in the arrangement of ideas? Are certain words repeated? And go ahead and list those observations that you're noticing. And the last question is, what effects do these moves create? Right? So all of these choices that the authors are making in determining the structure, in selecting evidence, in citing authorities, it is all intended to produce a certain effect. What is it? Are we being called to action? Are we being encouraged to change our minds? Are we being encouraged to make a policy change, to reach out to our representatives? What is it in the case of the articles that you're looking at? How do these appeals all work together to contribute to the author's purpose? So going through this Google form, I think for you all on your own, on one of your documents from your own research for Project 2, is really going to be very, very helpful in allowing you to brainstorm and to really start to gain momentum and move forward in drafting your report, which is going to be due 1 week from next Monday. So that's 2 weeks from today. Okay, so if you have only completed, by the end of this week, researching 2 sources, then that means you're going to need to research 6 more in the coming week along with your research. So kind of be weighing in your mind as far as your workload. Perhaps you should aim more realistically for something like 4 documents to be finished researching and looking at, and maybe choose one of those to go through this Google form, and you'll really be well on your way toward completing that Project 2 report in time. So let's go ahead and actually I'm going to pause us a little short today on our video to give you time to research, work through your discussion posts, which I'll show you over in the Canvas course website in just a moment, and to go through this Google form, really guiding you in detail through one text analysis for next week. So let me show you where those discussion posts are. I can just click over actually. In discussions, you will see, let me move my head out of the way. You have completed discussion post 4 for today. Thank you very much. You evaluated the purpose of one of your sources, and now you're going to move on to 5 and 6, due on Friday and next Monday, respectively. Discussion post 5 asks you to describe a second text you have found through your library research. So this is going to be exactly the same prompt as discussion post 3 that you already completed. So you're naming the author, and well, let's go ahead and click into it. It just asks you quickly to, in 1 to 2 sentences, describe a second text you found through your library research, who wrote it, and what are they arguing. And then discussion post 6, I'm going to go back there, asks you, like we were doing today, comparing our media bias chart, which of those 2 texts that you chose for discussion post 3 and discussion post 5, which of those is more authoritative, which is more partisan. You can take a look at that media bias chart to help you out. You can research the rhetorical situation. Take a look at who the communicators are, at what the venue is, what evidence is cited. Fact check it. Do you agree or disagree with the interpretations? So discussion post 6, you're answering, is one of these texts more authoritative? Is one more partisan? And why? So that should get you all set up. Let's see our last slide for next time. Okay, so for next time, we already covered number 1 and 2. Discussion post 5, describing a second text you found through your library research, is due on discussion post 6. Analyzing the partisanship and authority of your sources is due Monday. Also, please read chapter 13 from Becoming Rhetorical on creating written compositions, which you're going to need for next week when you go through those steps of invention and drafting and revising your project to reports. Reach out to me with any questions and concerns. In the meantime, jsapio@utexas.edu, or you can come visit me during office hours on Wednesday, or email me to set up an appointment at another time of your convenience. I hope y'all have a really great week 7, and good luck on your research. Don't forget also, the University Writing Center can help you even before you've written anything. If you want to go in and brainstorm with them, they're available for appointments. And also don't forget about your Rhetoric 306 librarians at the PCL library, who are available in person or via email or chat to help with your research as well. Y'all have a great week, and we'll see you next time.